Colorado Territory, summer of 1873, dry heat thick in the air, dust curling off the hard-packed trail like steam from a fresh wound. Tessa Barlow stepped off the back of the freight wagon with her 2 children huddled close. Her dress was torn at the hem, the fabric stiff with dried blood that was not hers. Her hands trembled as she gripped little Josie's wrist and pulled her gently to her side. Jamie, her oldest at 9, walked silent beside them, his face too still for a boy his age. They were alone now, truly alone. Her husband had left them 2 towns back, in a clapboard boarding house with a dead mule in the yard and no money for bread. He had stood in the doorway with his rifle slung over one shoulder and said, "No one's gonna want a broken woman, Tess. You're ruined and you're mine no more." Then he left. She had taken the children and walked until her feet bled, catching a supply wagon heading west. The driver let her ride in exchange for sewing a ripped axle tarp. They rode for days, through dry gulches and cold nights, toward the promise of a place she had never seen, a farm she had heard about from a woman in Kansas, whose cousin had once lived near Greeley. It was not much of a plan, but it was something. They stopped to water the horses at a small creek just before sundown. That was where she saw him. The cowboy was kneeling by the bank, rolling up his sleeves as he dipped a battered tin cup into the water. He looked up when the wagon rolled in, his eyes catching hers, steady and unreadable. His shirt was worn but clean, sweat darkening the collar. He had the kind of face that looked like it had seen too much sun, too much loss, of face that did not flinch when it saw hers. "You headed west?" he asked the driver. The man nodded. "Town's still half a day." "You know if the bridge over Clear Fork is back up?" The cowboy stood. "It is. I helped lay the beams 3 weeks ago." Tessa turned to gather their things, but her knees buckled. The world tilted. Jamie grabbed her arm as she sagged. "I got her," the cowboy said, already striding over. She tried to wave him off, but his hands were firm and warm as he steadied her. "You're burning up," he said, eyes narrowing. "When's the last time you ate something?" She said nothing. He looked at the children. Josie clung to her skirts, thumb in her mouth. Jamie squared his shoulders. "She needs rest," he said. "We all do." The cowboy looked at the driver. "Let me take them. My cabin's just over the ridge. I got food, a bed." Tessa shook her head. "We cannot." "I am not asking," he said. "You are sick. The girl's shivering and that boy is starving." She stared at him, her lips parted, heart pounding. Then Jamie said, "Mama, please." She nodded once. The cowboy's name was Ira McCade. He lifted Josie onto his horse, then helped Tessa mount behind her, with Jamie riding double behind him. The cabin sat in a bend of low hills, tucked between cottonwoods and a split-rail fence. It was small but clean, with a smokehouse out back and a sod cellar built into the hill. Tessa sat at his table, blinking down at a plate of warm beans and cornbread. Josie curled up on a quilt in the corner, already asleep. Jamie was outside, helping Ira bring in firewood. "You do not even know us," Tessa said hoarsely. Ira poured her a tin cup of water and set it in front of her. "You look like you needed someone to." She stared at him. Her face was still swollen on one side, the bruise now yellowing. She tried to lift the cup, but her hand shook too badly. He reached across the table and wrapped his fingers around hers, guiding the cup to her mouth. She drank. "I cannot pay you," she said. "I do not want your money." She looked down. "You do not want me either." He leaned back, arms crossed. "Why would you think that? Because I am not whole." He was quiet for a long time. Outside, Jamie chopped a log in half with a clean thunk. "My husband said no one would want a broken woman," she whispered. Ira looked at her then. Really looked. "Well, he was a damn fool," he said, "because I have got room for cracks." Her throat tightened and she looked away fast, blinking hard. That night, she lay on the cot while the children slept beside her. Ira had taken the bedroll by the hearth. The fire was low, the air thick with pine smoke and quiet. She whispered into the dark, "Why are you helping us?" From the floor, his voice drifted up, steady and low. "Because someone should have helped you a long time ago." She did not answer, but something deep inside her, something she thought had died, flickered to life again. In the morning, she woke to the smell of bacon and the sound of Jamie laughing. Josie was sitting on Ira's lap, her hair in 2 crooked braids, while he showed her how to hold a spoon without spilling. Tessa stood in the doorway and watched. Her chest ached in a different way now, not from fear, not from pain, but from the unfamiliar pull of hope. Ira showed them where the spring fed into a narrow trough just below the cabin. He'd cleared the path himself, stacking stones to keep the water from washing out the soil. Tessa followed him slowly, one hand resting on her side. Jamie carried a pail, careful not to spill. Josie picked wildflowers, her quiet hum trailing behind them like a ribbon. The sun was high, the sky wide and pale. A hawk circled overhead, casting a long shadow along the ridge. Ira crouched by the trough and dipped his hands into the water. Tessa stood a ways off, her dress faded in the light, her eyes cautious but clear. "You thinking of staying on?" he asked without looking up. "I can't ask you for more than what you've already given." "You haven't." She didn't answer right away. The wind lifted her hair from her shoulder. He watched her fingers tighten around the fabric of her skirt. "I'd work for it," she said. "I can mend, cook, keep the place. Jamie's strong for his age." He nodded once. "Don't need a servant, Tessa." "You're not beholden. I'm not looking to be taken in out of pity." His hands stilled in the water. "I know." She stepped closer, her voice lower now. "You don't know me, not really. I know enough. You know what I've run from." "That's not the same as knowing who I am." He stood, wiping his hands on his trousers. "You stayed upright when you had every excuse to fall down. That tells me something." She looked away, jaw tightening. "I don't want your charity. This place could use more hands," he said. "That's not charity." "That's sense." Jamie returned with the bucket, proud and flushed. Didn't spill a drop. Ira tousled the boy's hair. "Good man." They walked back together. Tessa said little, but her steps were steadier. That night, Ira brought out a worn deck of cards. They played by lamplight while the wind rattled the shutters. Tessa watched the way his hands moved, careful, deliberate. Josie fell asleep leaning against her, still clutching a scrap of calico. Jamie sat cross-legged on the floor, brow furrowed in concentration. "Used to play this with my brother," Ira said. "He was sharper than me, always beat me by a hand." "Where is he now?" Jamie asked. "Buried near Abilene. Fever took him 3 winters back." Tessa glanced at him, surprised by the softness in his voice. "Did you grow up there?" she asked. "Started out in Missouri. Moved west when the land gave out. Took to cattle driving after the war." "You fought," he nodded. "Rode with the Union, lost a finger to a bayonet outside Vicksburg." She looked down at his hand. The ring finger on his left had a slight crook to it, but she hadn't noticed it missing. He caught her gaze. "Most folks don't see it unless they're looking." "I'm sorry, I'm not. Got out alive. That counts for something." The lamp flickered low. Jamie yawned. Tessa rose and tucked Josie into the cot, brushing a strand of hair from her daughter's cheek. Ira watched her from the table, quiet. "You've done right by them," he said after a moment. She turned, folding the blanket. "I've done what I could." He stood and poured water into the basin near the hearth. "That's more than most." She hesitated, then said, "I used to paint, before." He looked up. "What kind of things?" "Skies, rivers, the cotton fields in spring. My mother kept a tin of pigments. I used to mix them with linseed and turpentine." "You still have them." "They were left behind." He didn't press. Just nodded once, slow and steady. As she lay down beside the children, Ira took his place by the fire. The room quieted, save for the low whistle of wind through the chinking. In the dark, she whispered, "I don't know how not to be afraid." Ira didn't move. "You don't have to yet." She closed her eyes. The warmth from the hearth reached her toes. Outside, the wind shifted, and with it came the scent of sage and distant rain. Tessa didn't dream that night. When she woke, her hand rested against the floorboards, fingers curled toward the spot where Ira had slept. He was already gone from it, but the lingering warmth told her he hadn't gone far. By the end of the week, Tessa had learned the rhythm of Ira's land. The mornings began with the soft groan of the pump handle as Jamie filled the basin outside. Josie fed the hens with quiet determination, scattering cracked corn with both hands. Tessa rose early enough to see the fog still caught in the hollows, her bare feet cooling on the packed dirt floor as she stirred flour and lard into dough. She didn't ask how long they could stay. Ira didn't offer a limit. On the 8th morning, they found the mare limping near the fence line. Ira knelt in the grass, brushing mud from the hoof with the edge of his sleeve. Tessa stood behind him, one hand shielding her eyes. "Stone bruise?" she asked. He glanced up. "Likely. I'll poultice it. Keep her stalled a few days. Let me help." He didn't argue. She fetched water and a strip of clean linen while he mixed pine tar and mashed onion into a thick smear. She held the horse's legs steady as he worked. Her arms were stronger than she'd realized. "She's skittish," she said as the mare tossed her head. "Lost a foal last spring," Ira said. "Hasn't settled since." Tessa ran her fingers gently over the mare's flank. "She's still trying, though." He tied the bandage off. "So are some folks." She didn't look at him. "Trying doesn't always mean succeeding." "No. But it's the only way you ever might." Later, while Josie napped in the shade and Jamie stacked kindling, Ira brought Tessa to the western edge of the land, where a narrow grove of cottonwoods grew beside a shallow draw. A tangle of ironweed and thistle brushed their boots as they walked. The air smelled of crushed leaves and river dust. "I was thinking," he said, stepping over a fallen log, "there's space enough out here for a garden, rich soil, plenty of sun." She turned to him slowly. "You want me to grow vegetables. I want you to have something that's yours." She studied the ground. "I haven't planted a thing in years." "Doesn't matter. Roots remember how." He pulled a folded packet from his coat seeds wrapped in oilcloth. "Got these from a peddler last season." "Meant to put 'em in, never did." She took the bundle. Inside were neat squares of folded paper, each marked in a rough hand: beans, squash, turnip. She held them like they might vanish. "I don't know if they'll take," she said. He tapped the toe of his boot into the dirt. "It's good earth." "That helps." That evening, after Josie had curled up beside her blanket, Doll and Jamie drifted off mid-sentence. Ira stood outside by the fence, arms resting on the top rail. Tessa joined him after a moment, her shawl drawn tight against the cooling air. "The boy's starting to look like he belongs here," Ira said. "He never really belonged anywhere before," he nodded. "Neither did I." She leaned forward, elbows on the rail. "Why haven't you gone anywhere else? This place is rough." "Wild." He traced a crack in the wood with his thumb. "It's honest, doesn't pretend to be more than it is." They stood in silence for a while, watching the moon rise over the ridge. "I used to think if I stayed quiet long enough, I'd disappear," she said. "That if I didn't speak, didn't ask, didn't fight, somehow I'd be safe. You're not quiet now. I'm trying not to be." He turned to face her then. The moonlight caught the line of her jaw, the worn curve of her cheek. She didn't flinch from it, not anymore. "I see you, Tessa," he said. She met his gaze, steady. "I know." Something shifted between them, then not sudden, not loud but solid, like a door settling into its frame. A kind of understanding passed without needing more words. She looked back toward the cabin, where the coals still glowed in the hearth. "I'll need to dig shallow rows," she said. "Turn the earth before it dries out again." "I'll bring the spade tomorrow," he said. She nodded once, then turned and walked back inside. He watched her go, the swing of her shawl, the firm set of her shoulders. In the dark, the wind moved through the cottonwoods. The mare stirred in the stall. And Ira, alone now by the fence, let out a breath he hadn't known he'd been holding. A thin veil of frost clung to the grass one morning when Ira handed her the spade. The earth had hardened overnight, but the sun was already climbing, quickening the thaw. Tessa knelt without hesitation, pressing her fingers into the soil. Her sleeves were rolled high, and the hem of her skirt was pinned to keep from dragging. Jamie crouched nearby, sorting the seed packets by hand, careful not to let Josie scatter them. "Start in rows here," Ira said, pointing to the slight rise where the light stretched longest. "It'll drain better come the rains." Tessa nodded, her breath fogging. "I'll keep it staggered, plant the beans first, then hold the root vegetables back a week. You know your way around a field." "My father managed a tenant plot near the Yazoo River. I followed him every planting season. He said anything worth eating came with calluses." She paused, then added, "He died before the war ended." Ira didn't speak, just set his weight behind the post driver, hammering a fence stake into the ground beside the plot. The rhythm echoed into the hills, a steady thud that settled into her bones like a drumbeat. As the sun warmed the hillside, Josie wandered off toward the cottonwoods with a twig in hand. Jamie stayed near, pressing seeds into the soil with the side of his thumb. Tessa worked beside him, her hands dark with dirt, her face turned toward the light. Later, while the children napped in the shade of the porch, Tessa stood at the stove, ladling hot water into a basin. Ira pulled his coat from the peg and dipped his hands in to wash. You've got a scar, she said, nodding to the pale mark on his forearm. Old bullet, he replied. Caught me outside Laramie when I was working herd contracts. Sniper didn't care who wore what hat. Did you fire back? No, I was holding a friend's reins. He didn't make it. She handed him a cloth, her expression unreadable. You carry that with you, I carry all of it. The day you stop remembering is the day you stop being worth much. Tessa folded the cloth slowly. I used to think forgetting would save me. That if I could scrub the worst clean, it wouldn't be real anymore. He leaned against the counter, drying his hands. How's that working? It isn't. They stood close in the small cabin, the space between them filled with the scent of soap and damp wood. Outside, the wind picked up, rattling the edge of the porch. Ira, she said, her voice careful, what are you hoping for? He didn't blink. I hope you stay. She looked down, then back at him. I haven't decided. Don't need you to. Not yet. Why not? Because hope's not the same as asking. I can carry it quiet. She stepped back, pressing her palms to the edge of the table. You don't owe us anything. That's not why I built a fence around that plot. He crossed the room to the hearth and added a log to the fire. The flames leapt, throwing light across the floorboards. That night, she sat outside alone after the children had gone to sleep. The stars blinked like scattered salt across the black sky. She wrapped her shawl tighter and waited. Ira came around the side of the cabin, a mug in one hand, steam curling from the top. He held it out to her without a word. She took it. They sat in silence for a long while, the wood creaking beneath their weight. I used to think a man's hands told you everything, she said at last. He glanced at her. Clean ones meant soft living, calloused meant hard work, bloody meant danger, but yours. She turned the mug slowly in her hands. Yours hold without hurting. I've had to learn, he said. Pain teaches you what not to pass on. She looked at him, really looked, as if seeing him not just as the man who'd taken them in, but someone with his own ghosts, his own reckonings. Do you ever think about starting over? She asked. He nodded. Every morning I wake up. She didn't speak again, but when she rose to go inside, she touched his arm lightly, just once. Her fingers left a warmth there that stayed long after she'd gone. He didn't follow her, not then. But he sat out there until the fire in the mug cooled, watching the horizon, knowing the ground they'd turned together would soon green with something new. The rains came hard in May, waking the riverbed and soaking the earth until it gave off the scent of clay and roots. The garden rose softened under the downpour, and Tessa worked each morning with her skirts damp to the knees, her hands firm in the mud. The children stayed close to the porch those days, carving shapes into the soft wood rail with the tip of an old nail Jamie had found near the shed. Josie sang low to herself, songs Tessa hadn't taught her, tunes maybe picked up from the wind or the groan of cabin logs at night. Ira came in one evening with his coat darkened at the shoulders, his boots caked in red grit. He set a parcel on the table and unwrapped it with care. Inside lay a folded length of cotton, pale blue with a faint cream stripe. You'll need something cooler for summer, he said, not looking up. Tessa touched the fabric. Where'd you get it? Traded a spare bridle and a sack of meal to the preacher's wife down in Fort Morgan. She's a good hand with cloth. I didn't ask for this. I know, she set her fingers to the weave. It was finer than anything she'd had in years. Not new, but cared for. She folded it once, then again, then pressed it flat. I'll make sleeves that tie at the elbow, she said. So I can keep working, he nodded. That's what I figured. Later that night, she sat at the window with her sewing kit open, threading her needle by the light of a stub of candle. The cabin was quiet, but not still. The fire popped behind Ira, who sat carving a handle for the drawknife he'd broken weeks ago. Jamie slept curled on a pallet near the hearth, while Josie had rolled herself into the corner of the bed, arms wrapped around her knees. Tessa stitched in silence for a long while, then said, There's a man in Arkansas who still thinks I owe him. Ira didn't look up. You don't. He wrote to my sister once, she continued, said I'd taken what was his. That I'd shamed the family name. What'd she say? She burned the letter before I could read it whole. Then I reckon it's ash now, and so's his power. She nodded slowly, her hands moving with more purpose. I don't want to carry his name anymore. You don't have to, she glanced at him. You think the town would talk if we stood before a circuit judge, he set the knife down. A few might, And you, he met her eyes without hesitation. I'd like the chance to call you mine. I'd like to give the children something steady to grow up inside. She drew a breath, the kind that settled deep in the belly. I want it, she said. Not out of need, not because you saved us, I just want to stay. He stood and crossed the room, quiet as always, and took her hand in his. The candlelight caught her cheek, and he brushed one thumb along the edge of her jaw, where the old bruise had long since faded. I won't ever raise a hand to you, Tessa, I know, and I won't ask you to forget who you were before me. I wouldn't want to. He leaned in then, and she closed the space without fear. The kiss was slow, like all things between them, built not of urgency but of earned trust. When it ended, she rested her forehead against his chest, and he wrapped his arms around her shoulders. We'll need to tell the judge come June, he said. I'll be ready. They married under the cottonwoods, with Jamie holding Josie's hand and the preacher from Fort Morgan reading from a worn psalter. Tessa wore the dress she'd made from the cloth Ira brought her, and she walked barefoot through the grass warmed by sun. No ring passed between them, just a promise spoken plain and steady. That summer the garden thickened with green. The beans climbed every stake, and the squash sprawled wide across the rows. Jamie built a scarecrow with a tobacco tin for a face, and Josie painted the porch rail with juice from mashed berries. By autumn, Tessa had taken over the ledgers for Ira's cattle contracts, keeping neat columns in her careful hand. She stitched new shirts for Jamie and taught Josie to read by candlelight. Ira added 2 stalls to the barn and built a bench beneath the window where she liked to sit when the wind rose. They didn't speak often of what came before, not because it hurt, but because it no longer ruled them. On the first frost, Tessa woke early and stepped outside barefoot. The air bit at her skin, but she didn't flinch. Ira came out behind her, wrapping a blanket around her shoulders. Cold morning, he said. First of the season. He slipped an arm around her waist, and they stood there together, watching the steam rise from the trough. I never thought I'd belong somewhere again, she said. You don't just belong here, he told her. You made this place home. She turned to him then, her eyes steady, her hand resting against his chest. So did you. They kissed again, not as a beginning, but as a way of continuing. Inside, the children stirred, the smell of coffee and wood smoke rising with the light. There was bread to bake and fence rails to mend. But for a moment, between the frost and the warmth of the rising sun, they stood still, 2 people who had been broken and mended, not back to what they were, but into something better. And they never left. They lived out their years on that land, raising Jamie and Josie with quiet love and steady hands. The garden gave for decades, and the cottonwoods held every season's wind. Their days were simple but full. And every night, without fail, they found each other beneath the same roof, with nothing owed between them but the kind of love that asks nothing and gives everything.